All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. We're looking at a conflict so forgotten by most Americans that they don't even know we fought it. Yet, without it, the Star-Spangled Banner simply wouldn't exist. A future president would have remained a complete nobody. And the young United States might have been pushed around by the British Empire forever. Today, we're unpacking the War of 1812. So, how exactly did a chaotic, disorganized underdog story forge a national identity and give us our national anthem? Well, we're skipping the roadmap today to jump straight into that mystery. To understand this, we have to rewind a bit, because wars don't just pop up out of nowhere. By 1812, America had only been independent for about 30 years. The ink on the Constitution was barely dry, and the mighty British Empire was already treating the young nation like it simply didn't matter. You see, tensions had been boiling over for years. The United States was being openly disrespected by the British in three incredibly infuriating ways. First, they slapped harsh trade restrictions on American merchants, seizing roughly 400 ships just for trying to trade with France. Second, they were actively arming Native American tribes out on the western frontier to block American expansion. And third, and this is the most personal one of all, impressment. To really grasp the sheer scale of this kidnapping at sea, get this. The British Royal Navy was locked in a life-or-death struggle with Napoleon, and they desperately needed sailors. So British warships would literally stop American merchant vessels in the middle of the ocean, board them, and violently drag American sailors off the deck to force them into the Royal Navy. By 1812, the U.S. State Department recorded roughly 6,000 American citizens kidnapped just like this. And Britain's response? Basically, deal with it. And talk about a massive mismatch. On one hand, you've got President James Madison. He was the brilliant intellectual architect of the Constitution, right? But the guy stood just 5'4" and weighed barely 100 pounds. Being brilliant at writing laws doesn't exactly prepare you for war. On the other hand, you have the British Empire, literally the most powerful military force on the planet. Even though they were busy fighting Napoleon, they were led in North America by Major General Sir Isaac Brock, an incredibly aggressive commander who absolutely believed the best defense was a devastating offense. Meanwhile, Madison is facing immense pressure from this fiery group of young congressmen back in Washington known as the War Hawks. Led by Henry Clay, they're demanding war to protect American honor. I mean, if you can't even protect your own sailors, what is the point of independence? But they had an ulterior motive, too. The War Hawks mistakenly assumed that conquering British-controlled Canada would be a total breeze. Even Thomas Jefferson confidently called it a mere matter of marching, figuring they'd just waltz in, plant the flag, and be home by Christmas. Yeah, spoiler alert, it was absolutely not a mere matter of marching. That first invasion was a total catastrophe. General William Hull led an American force across the Detroit River, but British forces quickly intercepted his supply convoy, essentially capturing his entire invasion playbook. Worse, General Brock teamed up with the brilliant Shawnee war chief Tecumseh. Brock pulled off this crazy bluff, warning Hull that he might not be able to hold back the native warriors once the fighting started. Hull completely panicked and surrendered Detroit without firing a single shot, handing over 2,000 soldiers instantly. But Brock didn't stop there. He rushed east to Queenston Heights to fend off another American invasion. He personally led a counterattack, charging uphill, sword in hand. It was incredibly courageous, but it actually got him killed on the battlefield. You'd think that would break the British line, right? Nope. It just enraged them. They rallied, and when New York militiamen on the American side flat out refused to cross the border into Canada to reinforce their own guys, the battle was lost. Nearly 1,000 more American soldiers were captured in a flash.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at the naval side of things, because here is where we finally see a glimmer of hope. While the land war was a complete disaster, the USS Constitution was about to shock the world. In August 1812, this American-built frigate squared off against a British warship. During the battle, British cannonballs literally bounced right off the Constitution's thick oak hull. An American sailor supposedly yelled, "Huzzah! Her sides are made of iron," earning the ship the legendary nickname Old Ironsides. It was a massive moral victory that shattered the myth of the unbeatable British Navy.
By 1813, the fate of the entire war hinged on controlling the Great Lakes. Enter Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. Witness the absolute insane heroism of this 27-year-old. He literally builds ships from trees on the shores of Lake Erie. When his fleet meets the British, Perry's flagship takes devastating hits until it's practically a floating wreck. Does he surrender? Absolutely not. He grabs his flag, climbs right into a rowboat, and rows straight through active, blazing cannon fire to his second ship. He sails it right into the British line, unleashes point-blank broadsides, and forces a surrender, declaring, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." Perry's stunning victory was a total game changer. It meant the British couldn't supply their forces in the Northwest, forcing a messy retreat, which absolutely disgusted their ally, Tecumseh. American forces chased them down to Morvytown. While the British line broke in minutes, Tecumseh didn't run. In a chaotic forest battle of hand-to-hand combat, the brilliant Shawnee chief tragically fell. With the greatest Native American leader of his generation dead, his powerful alliance crumbled, permanently ending organized indigenous resistance east of the Mississippi. So moving into 1814, things take a very dark turn. Napoleon is finally defeated in Europe, meaning Britain can now send their absolute A-team, their seasoned regulars, directly to America. They kick off a terrifying, fast-paced rampage down the coast with 3 major targets: Washington, D.C., Plattsburgh, New York, and the bustling city of Baltimore. This was arguably America's darkest hour. In August 1814, British troops marched right into Washington, D.C. after routing the Americans so badly it was actually jokingly called the Bladensburg Races. They set the Capitol entirely ablaze. We're talking the White House, the Capitol building, the Treasury, the whole shebang. But amidst this apocalyptic scene, First Lady Dolly Madison shows incredible nerve. She absolutely refuses to flee the White House until her staff secures the massive, full-length portrait of George Washington. It was a legendary moment of quick thinking that kept the literal face of the country out of enemy hands. Meanwhile, up north at Plattsburgh, a massive British invasion force of over 10,000 troops is marching down. But American Commodore Thomas MacDonough had a wildly brilliant trick up his sleeve. He used something called spring lines, anchoring his ships in a way that allowed him to literally spin them in place during the middle of the fight. As one side of his ship took heavy damage, he just spun it around, bringing fresh, fully loaded cannons to bear on the British. It completely obliterated the British naval squadron, and without those ships, those 10,000 British troops had no choice but to pack up and march back to Canada. Down in Baltimore, the British fleet is moving into position to ruthlessly bombard Fort McHenry. I mean, we're talking an estimated 1,500 to 1,800 explosive mortar shells raining down for 25 straight hours. The sky is lit up, the ground is literally shaking. And watching this entire nightmare unfold in terror from a British ship was a young American lawyer who'd been detained after trying to negotiate a prisoner release. You might recognize his name, Francis Scott Key. Key agonized through the smoke and explosions all night long. When dawn finally broke, he looked toward the fort and saw an unbelievable sight. A massive 30 by 42-foot American flag was still flying. The fort had actually held. Overwhelmed with emotion, Key pulled out a scrap of paper and scribbled down a poem right there on the deck. Those exact words, born from the smoke of Fort McHenry, would eventually become the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem. Now, by late 1814, both sides are just completely exhausted. Britain has no appetite for another long war, and America is basically bankrupt. So on Christmas Eve, diplomats signed the Treaty of Ghent. And here is the kicker. It essentially ended the war in an absolute draw. No territory changed hands, borders went right back to normal, and the wildest part, impressment, the literal kidnapping issue that sparked this whole conflict, was entirely absent from the treaty. It had naturally solved itself because Britain simply didn't need sailors to fight Napoleon anymore. But wait, because news traveled painfully slow back then. 2 weeks after the peace treaty was already signed in Europe, the absolute most epic battle of the entire war kicks off in New Orleans. You have Major General Andrew Jackson commanding this bizarre ragtag army of 5,000 frontiersmen, free black soldiers, Choctaw warriors, and actual pirates, and they're facing down 8,000 elite, battle-hardened British veterans led by Major General Sir Edward Pakenham. To put the sheer absurdity of this battle into perspective, just look at the fallout. The British marched in perfect formation right into Jackson's fortified earthworks, and it was a total bloodbath. In just 37 minutes, the whole thing was over. The British suffered around 2,000 casualties. The American defenders, wait for it, just 71 casualties. 71. It remains one of the most wildly lopsided victories in military history, making Andrew Jackson an overnight superstar. Now, because news of Jackson's mind-blowing victory reached Washington at almost the exact same time as the peace treaty, Americans totally ignored the fine print. As far as they were concerned, they had just defeated the British Empire. This sparked a massive, undeniable surge of national pride, and it proved completely fatal for the opposing Federalist Party, who had been anti-war from the start. They suddenly looked so unpatriotic and out of touch that the party just flat out collapsed shortly after. So what exactly do we take away from this explainer? The War of 1812 cost roughly 15,000 American lives and featured some truly staggering military blunders. Yet this incredible crucible forged something powerful. Out of a burned capital and a chaotic, drawn war, a united, resilient American identity was born. It was the exact moment the United States proved to the world and to itself that it was no longer just a fragile former colony, but a permanent, enduring nation. So I'll leave you with this to consider. If a war that ends in a tie on paper can completely unify a nation, is victory always won on the battlefield, or is it found in the identity of the people left standing?